Hello and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're here for another jam-packed, action-filled information overload just for you. And yes, that is definitely North Star Oasis. In case you missed it, we had it right there really big on the screen for you to see which show you are watching. Anyhow, a lot of stuff has been going on in the news lately. There has been a lot of stuff, and I'll tell you this, show preparation for me has actually been difficult because we've only got 1 hour. I've probably got about 5 shows worth of material of stuff that happened this week. We are not going to get through all of it, so don't worry. I'm not going to bore you with all of these congressional parliamentary procedures. No, we're not going to do that. But we are going to show you our Prager University segment today called The Suicide of Europe.
The civilization born of Judeo-Christian values, ancient Greek philosophy, and the discoveries of the Enlightenment is staring at the abyss brought there by its own hand. To put it starkly, Europe is committing suicide. How did this happen? It's a complicated story, but there are 2 major causes. The first is the mass movement of peoples into Europe. This has been going on steadily since the end of World War II, but sped up massively in the migration crisis of 2015 when more than 1 million migrants poured into Europe from the Middle East, North Africa and East Asia. The second, and equally significant, is that Europe lost faith in itself, its beliefs, its traditions, and even its very legitimacy. Let's take a closer look at both causes. For decades, Europe encouraged people, mostly from the Middle East and North Africa, to come as temporary workers. Nobody expected them to stay, yet they did. And nobody asked them to leave, even those who came illegally. As one British immigration minister put it in 1999, removal takes too long and it's emotional. And, of course, why would they leave? The economic opportunities were far greater in Europe than from where they came, and if the work dried up, there were generous welfare benefits to be had. For a time, immigrants were allowed, even encouraged, thanks to the European commitment to multiculturalism, to pursue whatever culture they wanted. But that didn't work out well. The leaders of Britain, France and Germany admitted as much in 2011 when David Cameron, Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel dramatically announced that multiculturalism had failed. So, the immigrants were then asked to assimilate and embrace Western values. If that happened, European governments reasoned, all the financial costs, even the occasional acts of terrorism, could be overlooked. But it never happened, and immigration just increased. During 2015, Germany and Sweden added 2% to their populations in a single year. By 2017, the most popular boy's name in the United Kingdom was Mohammed. So, why did European leaders decide Europe could take in anyone in the world, whether fleeing war or simply seeking a better life, no matter how different or even opposed their values were to European values? The one-word answer to this question is guilt. Aren't these refugees, the thinking goes, fleeing the consequences of European imperialism? Didn't we mercilessly exploit these unfortunate people in their home countries? Aren't we the cause of their misery? Accepting them into Europe is meant to be a wiping away of this guilt. This is especially true of Germany. In allowing 1.5 million people into her country in 2015, Angela Merkel was, in effect, proclaiming to the world that Germany, the great aggressor of the 20th century, the architect of the Holocaust, would be the humanitarian superpower of the 21st. A noble sentiment, perhaps, but who pays the price? The ordinary citizens of Europe, who've seen crime and terrorism increase exponentially. Their fears and frustrations have been largely ignored, or worse. In October 2015, the German government designated that 800 newly arrived immigrants were to be housed in the German town of Kassel. Concerned residents had a meeting to ask questions of their representatives, as a video recording shows that his citizens were calm and polite, and then, at a certain point, their district president informs them that the refugees are coming regardless of their objections, and anyone who does not agree with the policy is free to leave Germany. This official attitude, if there is a problem it's not with the refugees but with the citizens, reflects a sense of what I call tiredness. feeling among the elite class that the European story has played out, that we've tried religion and all imaginable forms of politics, and that each has one after another led us to disaster. We taint every idea we touch, so who's to say that the world wouldn't be better off without us? Of course, only people who have no idea how lucky they are could take this view. Ironically, no one knows this better than those refugees who truly did assimilate and who defend Western values. Extraordinary people like Somali-born Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who left the Netherlands because she believed in the principles of the Enlightenment more than the Dutch did. Or Hamid Abdul Samid in Germany, whose life is threatened by fellow immigrants because he defends European values. This is the stuff of suicide, the self-annihilation of a culture. It is possible that ordinary Europeans will join their leaders in this pact, but recent opinion polls suggest that they have no intention of doing so. How they act on that intention will be the great story of the years ahead. Are we about to witness the end of Europe, or its rebirth? I'm Douglas Murray, author of The Strange Death of Europe, for Prager University.
And there you have it. It's going to be an interesting question. It's something we've been watching for the last couple of years, but we are actually going to get back to that in just a little bit. As I said when we started the show, this has been a very, very busy week politically and in international affairs. And it's been a little contentious at times too. And no, I'm not even talking about FBI agent Peter Strzok testifying before Congress. We don't even have time to get into that today. But we are going to start off with an announcement, not a show announcement. We are not going away. We are almost through our 4th complete season, and we're really happy to be here. But we had a Supreme Court vacancy that occurred recently when Justice Anthony Kennedy had announced his retirement. Now, before we actually play anything about his replacement and that announcement that came out, a couple things about Anthony Kennedy. Anthony Kennedy was the 3rd person who was nominated in 1987, 1988 to fill the vacancy left by retired Justice Lewis Powell. When Powell retired, President Ronald Reagan was able to appoint his successor. And the first person he chose was Robert Bork. And we had covered a year ago during the Gorsuch hearings, or even before then with Merrick Garland, that Republicans had not forgotten the treatment that Senators Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden had given Robert Bork. And Ted Kennedy actually made a speech and statement on the floor of the U.S. Senate disparaging the character of Robert Bork. Yet Robert Bork was an honorable man. And there's probably not even a grain of truth to anything that Ted Kennedy said. Ted Kennedy was playing politics, and Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden got their way, tarnished the character of an honorable man, and Bork was defeated by a vote of 42 to 58 on his confirmation. After the Bork hearing, then Douglas H. Ginsburg was given the nomination, and then there came an allegation, and Ginsburg actually had confirmed it, that back in the 60s, when Ginsburg was young, he smoked marijuana. And that was controversial amongst the Democrats in the U.S. Senate. Mind you, when a few years later, when Bill Clinton admitted to smoking marijuana and not inhaling, that was overlooked by the Democrats because he was a good Democrat. So Ginsburg ended up withdrawing his nomination, and Anthony Kennedy was the 3rd person nominated for that same seat. And Kennedy, I think it was 97-0 or 97-3 is what he was confirmed by. And he was the consent. The Senate had a lot to do with whether or not Kennedy was passable. This is the way the Democratic Party had played politics with the Supreme Court. Republicans had not forgotten. If you talk to any Republican out there over the age of 45 today, and you mention the word Robert Bork, that's the one thing that'll probably set them over the edge. Now, I'm going to be fair to my Democrat friends. They feel the same way or have felt the same way with the 2000 Bush v. Gore Supreme Court case that put George W. Bush in the White House. And a lot of Democrats haven't gotten over that. Republicans have not gotten over the mistreatment of Robert Bork. And so now that that seat is up, and Anthony Kennedy lately has become a swing seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, then we're starting to get into some really serious cantankerous issues. This is not going to be a confirmation hearing quite like we had with Neil Gorsuch a year ago, because the balance of the court did not change. But like when Robert Bork was nominated, that could have tipped the balance of the Supreme Court to a more conservative Supreme Court or originalist Supreme Court instead of liberal progressive activists. The Democrats, who are liberal progressive activists, I'm talking Democrat Party leadership here in the U.S. Senate, they don't like that. So, that being said, earlier this week, President Trump made an announcement. And we are going to bring you President Trump's words right now and when he announced his Supreme Court pick.
My fellow Americans, tonight I speak to you from the East Room of the White House regarding one of the most profound responsibilities of the President of the United States, and that is the selection of a Supreme Court justice. I've often heard that other than matters of war and peace, this is the most important decision a president will make. The Supreme Court is entrusted with the safeguarding of the crown jewel of our republic, the Constitution of the United States. 12 days ago, Justice Anthony Kennedy informed me of his decision to take senior status on the Supreme Court, opening a new vacancy. For more than 4 decades, Justice Kennedy served our nation with incredible passion and devotion. I'd like to thank Justice Kennedy for a lifetime of distinguished service. In a few moments, I will announce my selection for Justice Kennedy's replacement. This is the second time I have been faced with this task. Last year, I nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to replace the late, great Justice Antonin Scalia. I chose Justice Gorsuch because I knew that he, just like Justice Scalia, would be a faithful servant of our Constitution. We are honored to be joined tonight by Justice Scalia's beloved wife, Maureen. Maureen? Thank you, Maureen. Both Justice Kennedy and Justice Scalia were appointed by a president who understood that the best defense of our liberty and a judicial branch immune from political prejudice were judges that apply the Constitution as written. That president happened to be Ronald Reagan. For this evening's announcement, we are joined by Ronald Reagan's Attorney General, Edwin Meese. Ed? And Ed, I speak for everyone. Thank you for everything you've done to protect our nation's great legal heritage. In keeping with President Reagan's legacy, I do not ask about a nominee's personal opinions. What matters is not a judge's political views, but whether they can set aside those views to do what the law and the Constitution require. I am pleased to say that I have found, without doubt, such a person. Tonight, it is my honor and privilege to announce that I will nominate Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. I know the people in this room very well. They do not stand and give applause like that very often, so they have some respect. And Brett's wife, Ashley, and their two daughters, Margaret and Liza, have joined us on the podium. And thank you and congratulations to you as a family. Thank you. Judge Kavanaugh has impeccable credentials, unsurpassed qualifications, and a proven commitment to equal justice under the law. A graduate of Yale College and Yale Law School, Judge Kavanaugh currently teaches at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown. Throughout legal circles, he is considered a judge's judge, a true thought leader among his peers. He is a brilliant jurist with a clear and effective writing style, universally regarded as one of the finest and sharpest legal minds of our time. And just like Justice Gorsuch, he excelled as a clerk for Justice Kennedy. That's great. Thank you. Judge Kavanaugh has devoted his life to public service. For the last 12 years, he has served as a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals with great distinction, authoring over 300 opinions which have been widely admired for their skill, insight, and rigorous adherence to the law. Among those opinions are more than a dozen that the Supreme Court has adopted as the law of the land. Beyond his great renown as a judge, he is active in his community. He coaches CYO basketball, serves meals to needy families, and, having learned from his mom, who was a school teacher in D.C., tutors children at local elementary schools. There is no one in America more qualified for this position, and no one more deserving. I want to thank the senators on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, for their consultation and advice during the selection process. This incredibly qualified nominee deserves a swift confirmation and robust bipartisan support. The rule of law is our nation's proud heritage. It is the cornerstone of our freedom. It is what guarantees equal justice. And the Senate now has the chance to protect this glorious heritage by sending Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. And now, Judge, the podium is yours.
Now, before we actually get into what Judge Kavanaugh has to say a couple things. First of all, just a few stats on Supreme Court justices, just to kind of give you a little context here. First of all, the youngest one to ever be nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court and actually make it through confirmation was Justice Joseph Story. Now, we got to go way back. I'm actually scrolling through a web page here. Joseph Story, he was 32 years old when he was nominated in 1811, and he died on September 10th, 1845, born in, I don't even know when he was, 1779. Anyhow, Joseph Story, the youngest one, ended up serving for 33 years and 219 days. The oldest Supreme Court justice to actually sit on the court was, no, Dallas, it's not Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm sorry. No, she's not that old, but she's getting up there. That was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. He was born in 1841 and died in 1935.
Did she star in Wizard of Oz, though? Didn't Ruth star in Wizard of Oz?
Didn't Ruth star in Wizard of Oz? Yes, I think she was, 2 years old when that, or 5 years old when that film came out, roughly. Anyhow, Oliver Wendell Holmes, he was an Associate Justice, and he was brought onto the court in December of 1902, served until January 12th of 1932. He served for 29 years and 35 days, but he was actually 90 years old when he retired. The longest tenured Supreme Court justice was William O. Douglas, and he was from Connecticut, and he served for 36 years, 211 days, from 1939 to 1975. He retired on November 12th, 1975, just 2 days after the Edmund Fitzgerald sank in the waters of Lake Superior. Just wanted to throw that out there. And then the longest current justice, well, we're actually going to be playing a section from his confirmation hearing a little later. So of our current justices, there is one who has a long tenure, but we will get to that. So with Judge Kavanaugh, I'm going to have to look him up real quick. Brett Kavanaugh, because I think he's 52. He's 53. Born February 12, 1965, and he has written the book, The Law of Judicial Precedents. He is educated at Yale Harvard School, Mater D School, Georgetown Preparatory School, Yale College, Yale University. So Kavanaugh is a Yale man. And so we are going to now show you Judge Kavanaugh's nomination speech.
Mr. President, thank you. Throughout this process, I've witnessed firsthand your appreciation for the vital role of the American judiciary. No president has ever consulted more widely or talked with more people from more backgrounds to seek input about a Supreme Court nomination. Mr. President, I am grateful to you, and I'm humbled by your confidence in me. Thank you. 30 years ago, President Reagan nominated Anthony Kennedy to the Supreme Court. The framers established that the Constitution is designed to secure the blessings of liberty. Justice Kennedy devoted his career to securing liberty. I am deeply honored to be nominated to fill his seat on the Supreme Court. My mom and dad are here. I am their only child. When people ask what it's like to be an only child, I say, It depends on who your parents are. I was lucky. My mom was a teacher. In the 1960s and 70s, she taught history at two largely African-American public high schools in Washington, D.C., McKinley Tech and H.D. Woodson. Her example taught me the importance of equality for all Americans. My mom was a trailblazer. When I was 10, she went to law school and became a prosecutor. My introduction to law came at our dinner table when she practiced her closing arguments. Her trademark line was, "Use your common sense. What rings true? What rings false?" That's good advice for a juror and for a son. One of the few women prosecutors at that time, she overcame barriers and became a trial judge. The President introduced me tonight as Judge Kavanaugh, but to me, that title will always belong to my mom. My dad went to law school at night while working full-time. He has an unparalleled work ethic and has passed down to me his passion for playing and watching sports. I love him dearly. The motto of my Jesuit high school was "Men for Others." I've tried to live that creed. I've spent my career in public service from the executive branch and the White House to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. I've served with 17 other judges, each of them a colleague and a friend. My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent. For the past 11 years, I've taught hundreds of students, primarily at Harvard Law School. I teach that the Constitution's separation of powers protects individual liberty. And I remain grateful to the dean who hired me, Justice Elena Kagan. As a judge, I hire 4 law clerks each year. I look for the best. My law clerks come from diverse backgrounds and points of view. I am proud that a majority of my law clerks have been women. I am part of the vibrant Catholic community in the D.C. area. The members of that community disagree about many things, but we are united by a commitment to serve. Father John Ensler is here. 40 years ago, I was an altar boy for Father John. These days, I help him serve meals to the homeless at Catholic Charities. I have 2 spirited daughters, Margaret and Liza. Margaret loves sports, and she loves to read. Liza loves sports, and she loves to talk. I have tried to create bonds with my daughters like my dad created with me. For the past 7 years, I have coached my daughters' basketball teams. The girls on the team call me Coach K. I am proud of our Blessed Sacrament team that just won the city championship. My daughters and I also go to lots of games. Our favorite memory was going to the historic Notre Dame-UConn women's basketball game at this year's Final Four. Unforgettable. My wife, Ashley, is a West Texan, a graduate of Abilene Cooper Public High School and the University of Texas. She is now the town manager of our community. We met in 2001 when we both worked in the White House. Our first date was on September 10th, 2001. The next morning, I was a few steps behind her as the Secret Service
was pubic hairs on a Coke can. later found out there was absolutely no truth to that whatsoever. The only thing that I can ever ask for, and I hope you agree with me, is that when it comes to appointing a Supreme Court nominee to the highest office in the land, that partisan politics should not come into play, and that you can examine his judicial record, go through his judicial opinions, and conduct the hearings the same way they were done prior to the Robert Bork hearings in 1987. A judge's personal views should not matter. Does it matter what, you know, who, oh, that was the other thing I was going to bring up. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. There's actually one thing about a predictive analytics tool about how he's going to vote based upon his political contributions. Yet, I never, ever, ever see this happen when Democrats get nominated. Where was the political contribution predictive analysis tool with Elena Kagan when Barack Obama appointed her? Where was that analytics tool back when Bill Clinton had appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Now, I will say that the internet was still in its infancy then, but how come we didn't hear about these things when the Democrat presidents appoint judges to the highest court in the land? Why don't we?
And that's what the Democrats said today in the Strzok hearing, is personal opinions don't matter.
Oh, and then in the Peter Strzok hearing, the Democrats were the ones who said that personal opinions don't matter. Okay, can we have that same standard apply to Brett Kavanaugh? I think that's all we're asking for. If Kavanaugh does something criminally wrong, let's take a look at Clarence Thomas. If what Clarence Thomas did legitimately did, or is alleged to have done, legitimately did occur, let's put it out there. Let's say he did sexually harass Anita Hill. What is the evidence? Because you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, right? You know, where has a complaint been filed? Not necessarily, and especially if, you know, Clarence Thomas would have, you know, been the top of the chain of command, there's other independent areas to go to file that complaint. Was there a police record? Is there a criminal complaint? Has this happened? Have other criminal type, similar types of criminal complaints been filed against Judge Thomas? What have others had to say? You know, has there been other people who come out and said that that had occurred to them? Or was it an isolated incident? See, that's the whole thing. With Anita Hill, there was none of that. That it was just Anita Hill's words against Thomas's words on something that happened a decade earlier with absolutely no other burden of proof. That doesn't hold up in a court of law. Now, if Kavanaugh did something, okay, the mystery of Brett Kavanaugh's baseball ticket debt. Now, it is not a crime to actually be in debt. Thankfully. Now, if you're a Republican nominee, if you're nominated by a Republican president to serve on the Supreme Court, of course, any type of debt you have, according to the Democrats, is a criminal act. That's the way they play. But the fact is, if there's a criminal complaint, that should be brought out in the hearings. But show me the complaint. Don't just give me an allegation. And that's what is happening. Allegations, 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 allegations. Every time a Republican president appoints a nominee to the Supreme Court. And it gets even more vociferous when the balance of the court changes. But yet, Article 2 of the United States Constitution states that the president appoints the nominee. I've heard people from the far left this week who say that, well, because Trump has a criminal investigation into him, a.k.a. the fraudulent Mueller investigation, that he shouldn't have the right to appoint a nominee to the Supreme Court. Excuse me, the U.S. Constitution, which is the governing document and the highest law in the land, states otherwise. I think one of the things that we're really in dire need of is a good civics lesson for a lot of people in this country. Last I checked, there were 327 million Americans, according to the U.S. Census Department. I would probably venture to say that maybe 1% to 2% actually fully understand civics. The Constitution gives the president the right to nominate. The Constitution also gives the U.S. Senate the right to advise and consent. Now, I keep hearing about Judge Garland, Merrick Garland. Well, Barack Obama appointed Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. He fulfilled his duties per Article 2. He did. And by the way, on Facebook last week, I posted that shouldn't the president have the right to choose? The first comment that came up said, well, how about number 44? Well, he did have the right to choose, and he chose Merrick Garland. But the U.S. Senate also has the right to advise and consent. And what did the Supreme Court do? Not the Supreme Court. What did the U.S. Senate do? They were silent on Merrick Garland. It wasn't the first time that happened. That happened, let me pull it up if I can. That happened numerous times in our country's history where there was no action taken. And it's going to take me a little while to pull it up, so I will just keep talking here. It just happened many, many times. Oh, I guess I'm going to also bring up one thing since I have it here. Another thing I've been hearing about, because Kavanaugh's Catholic, that a lot of the hardcore Democrats are bringing his Catholicism, and they keep saying that, well, the Founding Fathers never intended for religion to be involved with the state. Mind you, I pointed out that Keith Ellison, the U.S. Congressman, is a Muslim. Tulsi Gabbard, who is a congressman from Hawaii, is a Hindu. That Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders, both U.S. senators from Vermont and New York, are both Jews. So why should, if there's a religious test, which is prohibited per the Constitution, but if the my Democrat friends want to give religious tests to Christians, then maybe we should give religious tests to Muslims, Jews, Hindus who serve in Congress. Mind you, all four of them that I mentioned are all Democrats. Here's what President George Washington said in his farewell address from 1796. Quote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all of their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be considered the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." George Washington, farewell address, written in 1796. That spelled it out pretty clearly. And I wish I could find, I'm going to mention something else, because I've been debating the Supreme Court stuff all week. Something else that I wrote, since we only have a few minutes left. Past history shows that nearly every time a Republican president nominates someone for the Supreme Court that the Democrats feel threatened by, the nominee is subjected to false accusations, partisan political grilling, and slander. Robert Bork was an honest and upright judge who applied constitutional principles and the rule of law to every case he adjudicated as a federal judge. That wasn't good enough for Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden, who decided that playing politics with the Supreme Court nominee was a good thing. Senator Ted Kennedy made a false denouncement speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Not a word of it was true. Bork was voted down 42 to 58. Anthony Kennedy, who is now retiring, was confirmed 97-0. Clarence Thomas was an honorable man who served his country well as the chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission office after successfully serving as Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. In both instances, Thomas had a stellar career and a solid reputation for being an honest and upright man. During his confirmation hearings, unfounded sexual harassment allegations were perpetuated against him. Anita Hill, who made the allegations, claimed the harassment occurred during the DOE tenure. Yet, Hill also followed him to EEOC, asked for help getting a position at Oral Roberts University, and continued to seek his advice and counsel for years after she left EEOC. The allegations were made 2 weeks before Supreme Court confirmation hearings, which, mind you, was his fourth set of confirmation hearings after the alleged incidents occurred. In July 1991, Florence Kennedy addressed the NOW Conference, National Organization of Women, on the importance of defeating Thomas's nomination. And she said, quote, "We are going to Bork him. We're going to kill him politically. This little creep, where did he come from?" Thomas made it through with a 52 to 48 vote in the full Senate. With a track record like this, Brett Kavanaugh needs to stand strong because this kind of crap is probably going to get pulled again. And for those who think that Judge Garland, this is what I was looking for, not getting a hearing last year is without precedent. Here is a little bit of history for you. Supreme Court nominees who did not get a hearing, not including those who had withdrawn for various reasons, include John J. Crittenden, 1828, Roger B. Taney in 1835. He was later renominated and had served. John M. Reed, 1845. Edward A. Bradford, 1852. George E. Badger, 1853. William C. Michel, 1853, George Henry Williams, 1873, Thomas Stanley Matthews, 1881, and Pierce Butler in 1922. So the failure to take action on a nominee is part of advise and consent clause in the Constitution, and it does have historical precedence. So if the U.S. Senate is not going to act on the Merrick Garland nomination, there has been full standing, and it is in compliance with the U.S. Constitution. Okay. So we had Neil Gorsuch appointed afterwards. He was confirmed, but now the balance of the court is up. Brett Kavanaugh was the one who is now on the hot seat. I really hope that Judge Kavanaugh holds on to his hat, keeps his dignity together, because it's probably going to get rough. But for you, that also means expect this. Expect it to get bad. Expect it to get partisan. But that's the way it goes. Now, we started the show off with the suicide of Europe. Unfortunately, because we covered the Supreme Court and Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, we never got back to that. So we'll just have to hold on to that for another day. So for Dallas Pearson, our producer, I'm your host, Jeff Williams. You're watching North Star Oasis, reminding you there's 165 shopping days left till Christmas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Shouted at all of us to sprint out the front gates of the White House because there was an inbound plane. In the difficult weeks that followed, Ashley was a source of strength for President Bush and for everyone in this building. Through bad days and so many better days since then, she has been a great wife and an inspiring mom. I thank God every day for my family. Tomorrow, I begin meeting with members of the Senate, which plays an essential role in this process. I will tell each senator that I revere the Constitution. I believe that an independent judiciary is the crown jewel of our constitutional republic. If confirmed by the Senate, I will keep an open mind in every case, and I will always strive to preserve the Constitution of the United States and the American rule of law. Thank you, Mr. President.
So there is a little bit more about current judge and soon-to-be Justice Brett Kavanaugh. When I say soon-to-be, that doesn't mean that he's automatically in the Supreme Court. That means he is nominated. But per Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, that means the U.S. Senate does have the right to advise and consent, and that means confirmation hearings will be forthcoming. I had mentioned that the longest tenured justice was William O. Douglas, 36 years, 211 days. Now, when you take a look at the current list of Supreme Court justices, the longest current tenured justice is Clarence Thomas, 26 years, 262 days. So essentially, if Thomas spends 10 more years on the bench, he will be the longest tenured. However, Thomas is only 70 years old, so he's actually still one of the youngest. He might even be. Let me just look. Current Supreme. Well, I know Roberts is younger. I think Alito. Let's take a look here. Roberts is 63. Anthony Kennedy, who is just retiring, is 81. Thomas is 70. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 85, so she's only 5 years away. And unfortunately, I'm able to pull up the ages on one, and then next thing I know, the ages from there kind of go away. Let's see, Breyer is 79, 80 years old. So yeah, you have Thomas, Ginsburg, and Breyer are all over 70. Ginsburg being 85, Breyer being 79 years, 10 months, and Thomas at 70. And this is current as of June. So the youngest one so far is Gorsuch, who was appointed last year, and he is 50 years and 10 months. So another 2 months will be, another month will be 51. So already Kavanaugh will be older than Gorsuch, but he's going to be younger than Elena Kagan, who is 58 years and 3 months. So that's where we sit. But I brought up Clarence Thomas for a reason, and that was because of the contentiousness of his nomination hearing. And he had been gone through 4 confirmation hearings, 3 of them before his U.S. Supreme Court nomination. And yet, it was during 2 weeks before his Supreme Court nomination hearings, confirmation hearings started, he was accused of sexual harassment by Anita Hill, who was one of his law clerks. Mind you that Clarence Thomas had worked for the U.S. Department of Education when the alleged events actually had occurred. He then went on to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as the chairman, and Judge Thomas brought Anita Hill with, helped her get a job with Oral Roberts University as a law professor. Anita Hill had repeatedly requested Thomas's assistance in numerous different projects. There was no mention of impropriety amongst those two in 3 prior nomination hearings, as our confirmation hearings, as he was making his way up through the federal judicial process. But only 2 weeks before he gets onto the highest court in the land is all of these allegations come out. Just 2 weeks before. Now, there was nothing on file of a previous complaint with the bar. There was no news references of a prior complaint. There was no disciplinary proceedings. There was nothing. And yet, 2 weeks before, all of this stuff comes out. 10 days before the confirmation hearings, that's when the FBI had actually done the interview with Judge Thomas. So, when we see how things are going to be with a potential Supreme Court pick that could sway the balance of the court, don't expect the Democrats to just sit there and put up with it and say, yeah, we'll get along, go along. They don't do it. They play for keeps. They did that with Robert Bork. They did that with Clarence Thomas. They didn't really get away with doing that with Neil Gorsuch, but that didn't sway the balance of the court. Anthony Kennedy being a swing vote sways that balance. Now let's take a look at Clarence Thomas's response from his 1991 confirmation hearing, and then I will wrap up this segment with a little bit about what we can expect in the future.
Committee will please come to order. Judge, it's a tough day and tough night for you, I know. Let me
and I want to pay. I want you to pay
say
attention here as to who is actually speaking right now,
your
and that
preference
is
which is
Joe
totally,
Biden, who
understandable that
later
we go
became vice president.
1 hour tonight, 30 minutes on each side. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Senator, I would like to start by saying unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her. A second, and I think more important point, I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think that this hearing should never occur in America. This is a case in which this sleaze, this dirt, was searched for by staffers of members of this committee, was then leaked to the media, and this committee and this body validated it and displayed it at prime time over our entire nation. How would any member on this committee, any person in this room, or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion? Or this dirt dredged up, and this gossip, and these lies displayed in this manner? How would any person like it? The Supreme Court is not worth it. No job is worth it. I'm not here for that. I'm here for my name, my family, my life, and my integrity. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country when any person in this free country would be subjected to this. This is not a closed room. There was an FBI investigation. This is not an opportunity to talk about difficult matters privately or in a closed environment. This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
We will have, yes, would you like to say that?
Now, here's the thing. Thomas managed to escape with a 52-48 confirmation. 52 votes said yes, or 52 senators said yes, 48 said no. One of the closest Supreme Court nomination confirmations in American history. Came down to the wire. But look at the political crap and the personal crap that Thomas had to put up with. And he's been there for 26 years, 262 days. And personally, after seeing that, I remember when that happened, I kind of hope that Clarence Thomas stays on as the longest tenured Supreme Court justice. I hope he beats William O. Douglas's record of 36 years, 211 days. And considering that he's only 70, he can be on there for 20 more years and supersede Oliver Wendell Holmes as the oldest justice on the Supreme Court. I would not mind seeing that. Again, it comes down to the way he was handled. We are going to see that same type of thing with Brett Kavanaugh. That's coming up. I'm just doing a quick, did a quick Google search while that was playing. Just Brett Kavanaugh, only thing I put in the search bar. Unfortunately, I can't pull it up and show you on the TV screen. And then I clicked on the Google News tab. So this is my source. I'm going to read a couple of headlines. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh racked up some serious, the slug on the story says credit card debt. Wisconsin Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin comes out against Brett Kavanaugh. Fox News pundit says Brett Kavanaugh is pro-Obamacare. Is he? The Senate, Pam Bondi, she's a conservative. The Senate should confirm Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And then The Atlantic, the mystery of Brett Kavanaugh's baseball ticket debt. Washington Post, is Brett Kavanaugh the Forrest Gump of Washington? Vox, Brett Kavanaugh and the new judicial activism. Vox also, an old speech speaks to Brett Kavanaugh's views on Roe v. Wade. National Review, they're conservative. The first untruth about Judge Kavanaugh. National Review, Judge Kavanaugh and the environmental left. Slate magazine, they're partisan to the left. Brett Kavanaugh has some alarmingly outdated views on privacy. I'm not even reading these, I'm just giving you the headlines. Brett Kavanaugh, in depth through Vox, Brett Kavanaugh wrote that presidents shouldn't be distracted by criminal investigations. And then WBUR, TV station, I don't know where they're from, probably Birmingham, Alabama, or Burlington, Iowa, for all I know. Don't expect Brett Kavanaugh to protect the Affordable Care Act. So already they're scrutinizing his record, and they're chastising it, and I guarantee you that Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, they didn't have to put up with any of this. Neil Gorsuch did on the headlines, but that was about as far as it went. Clarence Thomas, the headline